Hello and welcome to the Geek on My Sleeve channel. We do weekly book reviews and live book discussions every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. My name is Peter, and I have with me Carl and
Paul.
my two brothers here. And we are going to be doing a spoiler-free book review of Dungeon Lord: The Wraith's Haunt, a lit RPG series, Book 1 by Hugo Huesca, narrated by Jeff Hayes and Annie Ellicott. It is done by Sound Booth Theater. They have an amazing YouTube channel. If you ever want to see the magic behind the voice actors, I would highly recommend checking them out. We'll have a link in the description below. This is going to count towards our 52 book challenge.
We pulled a quote from the book that we feel really just kind of like summarizes the emphasis of this book. And it's very, very early on in the book. So we feel like it's not giving too much away. Dialogue between the boatman and the main character, Edward. So he asks him, "Have you ever seen the play Faust? It's from your world." "Sorry, no. I've heard it's about a guy who makes a deal with the devil." "Faust is a doctor who thinks he has seen all there is to know," explained Charon. "So he offers the devil
Mephistopheles
a contract for power. The doctor thinks he can resist the devil's influence and use the power to do great good that would otherwise be impossible."
Mephistopheles
Agrees. He thinks that having great power is enough of a corruptible force in itself for Faust to succumb, so he decides to let the doctor roam the world and act as he pleases, betting that in the end his acts would advance the cause of the dark. In those terms is the deal forged, and the screenplay itself becomes a treatise of morality. Is a man capable of resisting the influence of great power in order to achieve great deeds? Or will having power be enough to align him to the cause of the dark? And we don't see a whole lot of that in this book, but there really are some bigger powers in play, and we kind of hear a lot of that as far as like the gods behind the scenes at battle, right? And they have their chosen ones.
I feel it really sets down the foundation for our main character.
I think that this really sets the main character's motive in mind for the whole series, and that's like the main thing about this.
Age rating for me, I would rate this a T for teen. It does have some adult language. It is fairly dark humor, slightly graphic, but at the same time, like, I think teen, it's not quite into the mature range of the scope.
I would put it somewhere between T for teen and M for mature, just like right at the border of M for mature. And one of the reasons why I think that it's there is a scene where somebody is dying. And I don't want to get too into the details too much for spoiler reasons, but you get to go through that whole process with them, and it's pretty graphic, and just the details, in addition to some of the sexual themes and just the overall darker element to the series. I don't think it would be really heavy on the M for mature, but if it was a video game, depending on how much graphics they showed, I think it would be right up there.
I agree with that because, yeah, it's like when certain things have died in this series, it gets pretty gruesome, and it also goes through a lot of details and emotions of how it's, you're in their shoes and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's really like 15 and above, T for teen.
A bit of a summary for Dungeon Lord by Hugo Huesca. For me, this is a lit RPG that having some foundation in D&D or Dungeons and Dragons, like it really the world really fit that theme for me.
I completely agree with the D&D theme, and it's also got a little bit of the feel of a isekai anime where reborn in another world.
We follow the main character, Edward. He's an ex-computer programmer, pretty much working at the equivalent of Geek Squad in another world. They call it Laser Shark. And he's working this dead-end job. The only pleasure he pretty much has in life is he gets to play Ivalice online with his coworkers at the end of the day. We open up seeing Ivalice from the Dungeon Lord's perspective as him and his buddies, the heroes, and his pain in the rear end boss do this dungeon fight. And we kind of get to see both worlds from both the Dungeon Lord's perspective and from the gamer's perspective. There's the kind of game lit RPG feel. And through a series of events, he ends up finding himself getting this offer from the boatman of this dark god to go and be a dungeon lord in Ivalice Online, which we find out isn't actually a video game. It's a whole other world. It's governed by the rules of objectivity. And one of the things that's really refreshing for me in this book is the main character is not overpowered, right? He pretty much gets thrown into this world and goes through the portal. What was one of our favorite quotes? I think you said it best, Paul.
Yeah, the boatman sticks like his top half out of the portal and he says, "Wait, it's dangerous to go alone. Take this." Yeah, he hands him one of his future minions' walking sticks.
So he wanders out of this portal. I don't even think he has a shirt at this point, with some batlins, low-level mobs, and his first two minions. And yeah, he's the lowest of the low basic stats starting over. And one of the big catches with Ivalice is a permadeath system, very much like, at least to our knowledge, this world, where if you die for good. Which, as a gamer, it was frustrating because then they had to re-roll their characters. But for him now, this is his world, and he goes from pretty much an NPC in the real world, working as a retail individual, to dungeon lord in Ivalice. Like I said, it's one of my favorite lit RPG series, especially when it comes to being more on the darker side as far like subgenres go. Even though the title's Dungeon Lord, I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. It had a lot more of an RPG feel to me, at least in this book, than a dungeon core or a monster core book like Divine Dungeon.
So it was somewhere in between for me. For example, if you said Life Reset, even though it was a village, that one felt more dungeon-esque, or Divine Dungeon felt more dungeon-esque.
Well, you're right on the fact that this book doesn't have a lot of the dungeon building, and you get a lot more of that in 2, really, is where I feel like you kind of work on that part of the book. But yeah, it's really more just like a RPG because it's done in such a short amount of time that you really can't see any of the dungeon building.
Yeah, this book flew by. I think you were the one that said it's pretty much like a little over 2 days.
Yeah, it starts with him gaming online at night, and then it takes 3 days after that.
3 days later is the epilogue.
We'll do a overall 5-star character development, world building, and scaling and progression. For me, I'd give this a 4.5 for overall, just because like it is a first book and it balanced itself well. As far as the character development goes, yet again, due to being the first book, I felt like we spent a lot more time on kind of the world building and understanding what all is around us, and a little bit of the D&D-esque or the magic system of the environment. So for my character development, I gave it a 3.5, 4-ish, where understanding that it's the first book, it's not going to be main priority. And then for the world building, I enjoy the realm it's in and how it's very D&D-esque, so I put that kind of as a 4, and mainly because the author's writing style and how there are subtle things that he just kind of has happen without really explaining it. And then there are other things that he goes into, more in-depth detail of explaining. So just the way the foreshadowing and, potential elements come through. Meanwhile, we're still getting, structure for our world and character development and understanding of what all is really going on. Then a 4 again for scaling and progression, because it starts off, in one world to another world, and then can't really say too much without destroying it. Anyway, 4.5 out of 5 for overall feels. Yeah, good foundation, good starting point. The series gets better.
I feel that's fair. I would put overall probably about a 4, 4.5. Character development, I wish there was more there. Probably close to what you said, except for maybe a little bit less on the character development and a little bit less on the world building. Hugh Hesca did a good job. I feel like it relied a lot on our fantasy knowledge and traditional D&D type setting. It did a good job kind of building and scaling the world. The storyline happened so quick that we really didn't get to see a whole lot of the actual larger scale world building, right? And scaling and progression did a good job. I put about a 4 out of 5. I think the book could have been longer, but it is the first book. But it definitely was over before I realized it.
4 out of 5 stars on overall rating. And the reason I do this is just because, like you said, it's a little short, but not too short. He didn't really rush it in a sense, but yeah, he didn't go to as much details about the character and more interaction I would have appreciated. So for character development, I'd give it about 3.5 stars. Just because, yeah, there's not a lot of content with character development here, but you do get to see a solid foundation on the characters, where they started and how they're going to go into the next parts of the story, and how they interact with each other is really what I appreciated about the first book on character development. The world building, I'd have to disagree with Carl on the fact that there's not a lot of world building. He really sets a solid foundation for his rules and how the story and the world has to work. That's what I think the most important part about this book really is he sets a set of rules and he sticks to them. But just like how Edward kind of feels about the rules of objectivity, the writer kind of feels about his own rules, with which you'll understand, after you read the book with what I said there. But he likes to play around and really throws you a few curveballs. So with the pacing, I kind of mentioned on that, the pacing. I'd give it a 4 stars. The pacing is just, it's done really well. I think it was kind of more of a pilot, and it was a pilot in the sense of it wasn't too long, but yeah, everything happened within 3.5 days, and you really wouldn't expect it to just be that, because it seems way longer with how much content within that time period. So yeah, overall 4 stars. I really like the book. It's one of my favorites of the 4 that are currently in the series.
Yeah, definitely worth picking up if you're into lit RPG, fantasy, and okay with more adult themes. But in a lot of ways, I feel that the author's trying to stick true to life in fantasy, because war and combat is graphic and gruesome, right? And when you're dealing with these fantasy creatures, it's not all clean and PG.
It's also like real life. Killing something isn't clean. Fights aren't clean. The fact that there's not really guns in this world, so it's everything has to be done with in the person's face. It's no one wants to describe that with words.
And he does a good job articulating it through his writing.
Thank you for joining us for this spoiler-free book review. I definitely would put it up there in the top 5 for favorite lit RPGs. And we are thinking about doing a Geek Out for this.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to geek out with you guys here soon.
Bye.
But
All right.
Bye.